खैर मकदम है आप सबका आज की इस डिस्कशन में। आज की डिस्कशन दोस्तोस्की के नाम दोस्तोस्की के बारे में डिस्कशन स्टार्ट करने से पहले हम उसकी जिंदगी पे एक मुख्तसर नजर डालते हैं। His name was Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky. He was born in Moscow in 1821, inside a hospital compound where suffering was part of daily life. His father was a doctor, his mother a storyteller, and between pain and imagination, Fyodor Dostoevsky learned to read the human soul. After his mother's death, he was sent to a military engineering academy in St. Petersburg, but discipline and machinery could never contain his restless mind. What truly consumed him was the mystery of human beings, their guilt, their faith, their inner wars. As a young man, he joined the Petroshevsky Circle, a group of thinkers who dared to read banned books and dream of a free Russia. That dream became a crime. He was arrested, chained, and taken before a firing squad. The final command was about to be given when at the last second his death sentence was cancelled. Instead, he was sent to a prison in Siberia. 4 years in a prison camp among murderers, thieves, and forgotten men transformed him. In the cold and humiliation, he discovered that even in the darkest souls, the spark of humanity still burns. After that, he was not freed. Instead, he had to serve in army for another 6 years. He returned sick, poor, and haunted, yet with a deeper vision of life. On February 9, 1881, Dostoevsky died in St. Petersburg. दोस्तोस्की पे डिस्कशन करने के लिए मैंने आज यहाँ पे बुलाया है अपने दोस्तों को। आकिब सर है मेरे साथ और सफीर सर है मेरे साथ। मेरे इस मोनोलॉग में या मेरी इस इंट्रोडक्शन में कुछ कमी रह गई हो तो मैं आकिब सर और सफीर सर से ये दरख्वास्त करता हूँ कि वो उस कमी को पूरा करें। आकिब सर, सफीर सर।
थैंक यू वासिफ साहब। दरअसल इसमें ऐड करने की जरूरत नहीं है। आई विल जस्ट काइंड ऑफ टॉक अबाउट दिस इन अ सीक्वेंशियल मैनर। जो आपने जिक्र किया, his mother, Dostoevsky's mother, she was a very good storyteller, and but perhaps it was because of this that she was in the house as a storyteller, and most of her stories were of biblical origin. She was a devout Christian. ये जो सारी stories उसके पास आती हैं, you will see in his writings a recurrent theme of this Christian stories. It comes from this. And उसके बाद आपने कहा ये कि he wrote his upbringing. He had a first-hand experience of this, the lower stratum of Russian society, in this military, hospital, where his father was probably deputed for his work. So तमिस छु मिला first-hand experience of things, and kind of later on he goes on to write about these experiences. And the first book he wrote was Poor Folk, and then it was a time of Belinsky. Belinsky was in Russia. He was considered to be the greatest critic of the time, probably the most famous. And he hails this book as he hails Dostoevsky to be the successor of Gogol. Gogol was a very famous writer of his time. He says that he is the hope of Russia. Dostoevsky is the hope of Russia. And afterwards, he comes and meets him. He comes and meets Dostoevsky in his home, and they have a long discussion about his works and his what he intends to write about. This happens after he writes Poor Folk, his first book. And they spend the night together talking about his works and about Belinsky's responses to this. And when Belinsky leaves in the morning, Dostoevsky, in a sense, becomes very emotional. Because it was important to him that Belinsky speaks so highly of Dostoevsky. And afterwards, he writes another book, The Double. And after this, there was, I would say, Belinsky, in a sense, he criticized. The Double is his second book. Yes, sequentially the second book. Okay. Though when this book was written and published, Belinsky says that this is not what we should have produced. So there is this kind of a split of, in a sense, if they were friends, so there was this split of friendship. And I would take this discussion forward in this sense that after this, you talked about this Tsarist regime and his association with Petroshevsky Circle. Petroshevsky Circle was famous for discussing the books that were banned in those times. Tsars regime had banned some books, and Petrovsky
Those
circle.
books were of political nature.
Essentially, yes, because that is why regimes generally ban books who were of this political character. So what he does is, because of his association with this Petrovsky circle, he is arrested, and in a sense, he was to be killed by firing squad. But finally, we come to know that this hiring was just a mock execution. It was not to be, because by the moment this execution was to take place, the regime by the last moment, a person is sent in to bring in a message, a courier, that this sentence is to be pardoned and reprieved.
So what you are trying to say is that it was pre-planned.
In a sense, yes, because we call it a mock execution. It was not a. It was pre-planned. Everything had been decided. Probably, one must say that it was just to strike terror into this Petrovsky circle, that you would not do this. And afterwards, what is done is he is sent to this jail in Siberia. He spends 4 years of hard labor in Siberian prison. In fact, this becomes an inspiration to his book House of the Dead. He chronicles. Yes.
You continue.
Yeah. This chronicles the life inside prison, the life of a noble person, because Dostoevsky belonged to a noble race. If you divide the society into these two groups, this a lower class and an upper class, in a sense, he belonged to the upper class, though not among the ruling class. So he was sent to this Siberian prison for 4 years, and where he comes in close contact with people from the lower stratum of society. And this is the inspiration for, I already said that this is the inspiration for writing House of the Dead. And then afterwards, what he does is he comes out, but he's sent again into this compulsory military service, and he spent 6 years of his life doing this. Okay, and then afterwards, what happens is that when he comes out of this phase of his life, a difficult phase, he has epileptic fits, and he has gambling addiction. He falls into this addiction for gambling, and he almost becomes, in a sense, penniless. He doesn't have money. He even begs for money from people who are close to him. And it is during this gambling addiction and this this phase of his life, when he was without money, he has this a sort of a contract with a publisher, Stilovsky, though I would name very few in his life, because sometimes it becomes difficult to pronounce Russian names. They are, in a sense, long with big names, and they contain the first, middle, and the third name. Stilovsky, I would say. Stilovsky was the publisher. And what they do is they sign a contract that if Dostoevsky fails to produce a good book in 1 year, all his publishing rights will be forfeited. It will, in a sense, this effectively meant that whatever money this writing would have produced, if Dostoevsky was sort of getting some money from the publishers, he was the publisher, he will not get the money. And then he gives him the time of 12 months, and he does not produce anything in 11 months. And then there are only 26 days left. You have 11 months and then 4 days again.
ये किस नॉवेल की हम बात कर रहे हैं?
I'll talk about the gambler. He falls into gambling addiction, and he doesn't have money. And afterwards, what they do is he has some well-wishers, and they suggest him that he must get in a stenographer who will help him write down what he dictates. For example, he dictated in the day, and she would make sure that by the end of the day or during the night, she would write down what he had dictated in the day.
Up till this time, may I interject?
Yes, please.
Up till this time, can you just name, please, some of the works Dostoevsky has already produced? Because Gambler he produces Gambler in 1866 around, if I'm sure. So, till this time, what were the works he had produced?
So, he fell into this I would say he fell into debt, and he had no money. And during this time, he was suggested to have a stenographer, and this woman comes in and, in a sense, lives with him for some time. There was a case against Dostoevsky that he will have to forego all the publishing rights to his publisher, which will effectively mean, in a sense, that he will have no money if he fails to produce a book in 12 months. But again, since he was into gambling, for 11 months he does not produce anything, and towards the end of this, his well-wisher suggested the service of a stenographer, and surprisingly they produce a book in only 26 days. This was the book The Gambler. He talks about the gambling addiction, and he has sort of in casinos. And in short, I would say I would like to mention a few books that were very famous, that are in fact very famous and regarded to be some of the best works in the world literature by Dostoevsky. And to name a few of them, I would say he began from Poor Folk and through the Notes from the Underground, The Double, and he wrote Crime and Punishment, The Idiot, Demons, and his magnum opus, which he wrote towards the later part of his life, Brothers Karamazov.
पहला सवाल रहेगा आकिब सर से भी और सबीर सर से भी. आकिब सर, what is Dostoevsky to you? How do you see him?
Dostoevsky to me is a person who has suffered, and he has written about his suffering, his own self, in a sense, and considered to be one of the greatest writers ever. I think he should be ranked as one of the greatest philosophers as well, because his books are full of philosophy. In fact, one of the philosophical themes, existentialism, is considered to be rooted in his works. It was because of Dostoevsky's works that you later on had Friedrich Nietzsche, you had Jean Paul Sartre, and others that came later.
Now, ये सवाल छो पांसी मंज वारिया बोर्ड सवाल, because अगर इस Dostoevsky so works which you and the person Dostoevsky is, you should वारिया मुश्किल सवाल answer करूँ. But now you have asked my opinion about Dostoevsky. भवन के to me Dostoevsky is one of the most important thinkers, though he belonged with the 19th century, but he is relevant since then. He has influenced world literature. Every great artist across the planet has read Dostoevsky, has been influenced by Dostoevsky, and his works, they delve in almost every aspect of a man's life, whether it is psychology, whether it is man's social relations, his faith, his relationship with God, his relationship with people around. Once you start reading Dostoevsky, he answers many questions that a thinking being has. He will not answer the questions by giving philosophical propositions, because he is a novelist. Though Akib Sir said he's a philosopher, I regard him one of the greatest philosophers ever lived on earth. But the beauty of Dostoevsky is, social philosophy vanan right through fiction. Atmas kya advantage? तमिस छन पेवान कहीं चीज प्रपोज करूं, तमिस छन कहीं चीज पेवान प्रूव दूं. He gives a character. अगर तो Dostoevsky characters वुचो across his books, almost जो हर का philosophy तन पनन character मंज हर्मस. He takes a character and makes the character represent a philosophy. He gives that character the best of the arguments the philosophy of that time had. In fact, the philosophy of our times has. But su character Ivan, su pat as real person karan su fictions must produce. Or times characters in life having through philosophy, should those kamal. Tabashu probably agar tu wushu most of the critics of Dostoevsky or most of the philosophers and artists, yel tim Dostoevsky refer chi karan, they regard him as one of the prophets of 19th century. Chahe su ek English author Virginia Woolf cha, or it's Albert Camus. So if you take any great artist who lived after, who lived after Dostoevsky, they are greatly influenced by his works. Agar tu psychology nivan chu, yim te Dostoevsky pata psychologist yawan chu. Timun khatir chi banan Dostoevsky writings is important. You that timun kante so psychology in books chu, pre-media clinical psychology in kitabs chu. This is beauty. And when you talk about writers who want to write, for example, unless they go through Dostoevsky, timan hi nusak perspective. I'll tell you an anecdote about one of his books, Crime and Punishment. One of the best books he has ever written. Though we can make a case whether this is the greatest book or Karamazov or Idiot. Different people have different opinions, but it is one of the greatest books ever written in world literature. Ele Dostoevsky katchu karan Crime and Punishment means. He also cynic actually divan tam saatu korashuk cynic. He talks about those claustrophobic police stations, those houses, dark houses where he lives. And he's the translator of Dostoevsky, Macduff. Is it Macduff?
Yes, one of the translators.
David Macduff. Sushil Khan ke is the important protagonist Shatmas, Rodion Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment. He lived in a dark den. And those, whatever the word for this was in Russian, but Sushat Karan compared with the den. He's seeing a Khavun and then making a case for Raskolnikov and the other characters in the same novel. This is what an artist has to do, what an artist needs to do, what an artist is supposed to do in his work. And ili reader akims paranchu, he should get yuta impressed. Crime and Punishment seriously athlete par. He has to revise it multiple times, or any other book. Yuta she earns kanti writing important. So Bawan, bayim wapas thoni sawal aspect ke Dostoevsky agar main wanan chutai. Dostoevsky Kyashu. I think one of the greatest thinkers who ever lived on this planet. Thank you.
Okay, my next question will be, do you think Dostoevsky is still relevant today in 21st century? And why?
Thank you.
Good philosophies, good literature is always relevant. But then if one has to sort of specifically talk about Dostoevsky, if I have to talk about him in particular, I would say if he has written Gambler in the time he has, that is still relevant. Relevant in this sense because you see people falling, in a sense, into these sort of
Addictions.
traps, gambling traps, online gambling. Sort of. Somebody had to go and visit a casino, for example, to gamble. As you can easily inside your homes, you can sit and you can gamble. And essentially in Gambler, Dostoevsky talks about it to be a sort of, what do you call it? A psychological thing. A psychological thing. Psychological thing in this sense that he says it is, in a sense, Shimis Nafras Asan under Kathamas Khayal to gamble his wealth. Gamble his wealth. And then it applies to everything in life. For example, he's gambling with everything, in a sense. For example, he's gambling with his life, with his relations. You can never be sure, for example. You says how I care. Let's imagine a scene inside a casino. And it's possible that I have a strategy and then I will win or lose. You don't. It's just a mere chance.
Yes, probability.
Simple. As simple as that. And then, for example, I talk about this his characters having this tendency of this self-destructive tendencies. Themselves themes have mostly morality, faith, and human condition. By and large, these are the areas he's writing upon. For example, let's say, if, for example, Raskolnikov, I would talk. I need to have a sort of a
Okay,
reference
so
to character.
we are coming to crime and punishment.
Yes, we're talking about crime and punishment.
One of his most known,
one of-
most
yes,
famous
one of the most
characters.
famous.
Yes.
Okay.
Most read also.
Most read.
There is this person Raskolnikov who goes on to kill a woman who is a pawnbroker. You should understand कौन pawnbroker चूंकि इधर करो थोड़ा सा इस कथ कि pawnbroker क्या हो सकता है ये मस अनान क्या चीज का घर ऐसा क्या चीज you need money, you sort of give it to the pawnbroker and the pawnbroker gives you some money in exchange for this. तो पत क्या है सिम करना पत ऐसे वनान ऐसा करो we redeem this ऐसा अनु पोंस वापस तो दिमो ये पोंस तो at क्या
It was like mortgage.
yes,
like
yes, mortgage, yes. Money lending, mortgage thing. Sometimes वक्त उस इतु यासन.
It was very vogue in those times.
Pawnbrokers is time. So basan ये मतलब this woman, this elderly woman, she in a sense, this miserly woman, she doesn't need the wealth she has. And driven by his idea of this Napoleonic idea that one can do a wrong if it is in the interest of humanity, in the greater interest of humanity, one can sort of do some wrong, and it's not a wrong. So what he does is he goes and kills this woman.
For the greater good, you can commit any crime.
Yes, a crime in the name of greater good.
This woman is basically she's a rich woman, a widow of a civil servant, and she has good money, but she doesn't use the money. She's as Akib Saban, she's very miserly, and Raskolnikov commits this crime, the perfect crime, and he escapes. Right? He escapes, and then
we talk about, let's say, Ivan Karamazov and Brothers Karamazov. He always
let's finish this crime and punishment first, then we will come to other novels.
So what he does is he commits a murder, and in order to hide his murder, he commits another murder. He kills the sister of this old lady, and then sort of, in a sense, he descends into this. His conscience starts accusing him that he shouldn't have done this, maybe, probably. But in a sense, Dostoevsky is talking about whether this morality is relative. Can we have a relative this
morality?
What do you call it? Moral relativism. Let's later on call moral relativism. And you see in Raskolnikov, he's, in a sense, the plot is set in such a manner. Raskolnikov is not held responsible, but towards the end of it, you will see he just goes and talks about, he confesses, he goes to the police, he tells them, I am the murderer, although they sort of do not believe him.
We can say one of the themes in Raskolnikov's novels is guilt.
Yes,
that's
guilt.
what Raskolnikov is feeling.
Yes. There's a nice analysis, I would say. Crime.
He escapes the crime, but still.
He's guilt-ridden. Yes, he's guilt-ridden, and then he sort of gives himself up to the police.
He becomes very delirious after committing the crime.
And he even sort of, now he has to redeem himself. And he redeems himself by means of a woman by the name Sonia. Sonia is the daughter of a drunk, of a person who has lost his life because he was alcoholic. And then this girl, a very young girl, falls into prostitution. She has to, because
she is forced to go for it.
Yes, she's forced to.
Her father drinks them into poverty.
Yes.
Probably in Marmalade. He was also a civil servant.
And what happens later on is he redeems himself through this girl, Sonia, and her idea of this Christian faith. And at the same time, I would like to talk about Ivan Karamazov, for example, because the question is about whether he's relevant.
Here I want to know in this crime and punishment novel, whom does Raskolnikov represent? Is he representing every one of us?
Yeah,
What do you think?
yes, I would like to answer. Bonatai, very coincidentally, you'll to announce karo we're like making this podcast. I happen to meet a person, not in person. I mean, we happen to talk, connect. A youth, probably from our part of the world, Kashmir, and
You should.
it becomes
What
relevant.
is Imshna Kasanchuma Palmi? Panchasate Midavana. आज सुबह सुबह युवान मैं समझो वायदा ना पर 5-6 story खाद में देंगे ना
No, but what you can relevant? How is Raskolnikov relevant? You can just say some Marxism relevant. Agar the time नहीं हो ना, so time of Russia. When we talk about atheism, utilitarianism, materialism, in Europe, it evolved over centuries. It took it evolved, Enlightenment project and industrialization and revolutions and revolution. But what happens in Russia, this comes as a jolt. Just within 10 years of time, they have to face their, prior to this, as you mentioned, his mother is a Christian, a devout Christian.
Yes.
Okay, but then this philosophy comes in from Europe. And people fall in this atheism and utilitarianism, materialism, new philosophies, I would say. Raskolnikov represents that philosophy. He represents a materialist, a utilitarianism, a youth. He is basically a law student, probably in his early 20s. Okay? So these tendencies we can see in our part of the world right now. I just talked to a person, and that person is a youth in college, and I was kind of surprised that almost I could overlap the two characters. Okay, in the person's head, it almost represented a Raskolnikov. The issue is what Raskolnikov did. He is an atheist. He is a materialist. His philosophy, his political philosophy is that of Napoleon character.
Yes.
Napoleon character. Now, what Dostoevsky did is he's trying to redeem Raskolnikov in the novel, because Raskolnikov represents the theme, the youth of the times. And in our part of the world, we see the tendencies in the youth. They're becoming material. In fact, we are also material. Most of us are material. There is less, a focus on life, the simplicity of life, the joy of basic things of life. So Raskolnikov is a character throughout the world, across, nations and across this planet. And it has come to our part of the world also now. So how do we deal with this? Raskolnikov tells us in the novel. How do we deal with it? Towards the end of the novel, we see this prostitute, Sonia. She is a Christian. She's a devout Christian. Because of the circumstances she has to face, she is kind of pushed to the prostitution. But she keeps her faith. And because of her faith, Raskolnikov is redeemed. When he confesses and goes to jail, and he kind of is redeemed there. There's a good anecdote about Crime and Punishment. Sonia gifts him a novel. Sonia gifts him a Bible. And once he enters in the prison, and throughout when there's a dialogue about Raskolnikov, and there is Dostoevsky talking about Raskolnikov, he does not, we are told that he does not open the book. It's there in on his bed, laying on his bed all across. And later on, in the epilogue of the book, we see how the man is redeemed by just looking across a river, and there's this family who are rearing some goats, right? And that simple act of life makes this man, who is hyper intelligent, who represents an atheist, an atheistic morality, this moral relativism. But Dostoevsky tries to stick to this thing that morality has to be objective. It is objective. You cannot kill. It doesn't matter your intentions. It doesn't matter your philosophies. We cannot kill. in cold blood. So this becomes relevant in our part of the world. If I made something,
I would like to
Do
add
you-
to this. I would please
Okay.
allow me to speak on this. This question of whether it's relevant or not, it was relevant then, it is relevant now. The question is that Russia in those times faced this, in a sense, a twin challenge from this atheism, as Safir Saab has rightly pointed out, atheism and materialism. And then, in order to answer these questions and the possibility of youth falling into these, what do you call this, into the trap of atheistic materialism, he develops his characters. For instance, he develops Ivan Karamazov, for example, in Brothers Karamazov.
Okay.
This Ivan Karamazov is a rationalist. He thinks
yes.
he thinks rationally, he thinks with logic and reason, and tries to reason out everything. Even the question of existence of God, he talks about it. And then his logic and reason leads him to in a sense, to conclude that God may not exist, or God cannot exist, because then we will not have suffering in this world. Though it's a question that is still relevant, that is still being asked, that if there is a God, for example, and if there is a God, why do we have suffering in this world? So this question of atheism, he answers by taking up the character of Ivan Karamazov, and one has to go through the book in order to understand how he answers this question. And the other challenge was of materialism or the utilitarian materialism, where this is an English philosophy where they believe that if a person is given material comfort and material gains, he does not have anything else to to seek in his life. He has this. He lives in a crystal palace, for example. He imagines it to be like this: that you have a man inside a crystal palace, and then you give him bread and butter and everything he needs, and all he has to do is carry on procreating. That is a sort of a this.
It was a prominent philosophy then.
Yes, utilitarian heaven. He imagines it to be utilitarian heaven. And can a person stay inside this? Can a person live inside this crystal palace? So he answers this in The Underground Man, wherein sort of this man, in order to assert his own self, will, as per Dostoevsky, break the glass window and come out of this crystal palace. He cannot live inside this.
To assert himself.
Yes, to assert his own agency, to assert his own will. And though, in a sense, one can broadly classify it as debates and discussions between determinism and this voluntarism, that person whose this fate has been, in a sense, fixed, decided upon by the conditions or God, or this the will and the agency of the person, that he has something in himself that he can, in a sense, change the course of the events. I hope I have been able to answer this question convincingly.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to answer the questions, because then if we answer such questions, then what's left to discuss?
मैंने दोस्तोस्की की जितनी नॉवेल्स भी पढ़ी है उनमें मैंने देखा है कि मेन थीम जो दोस्तोस्की का रहता है वो है सफरिंग. Why is it that he always talks about suffering, and what does he want to convey to the people who read him regarding this suffering?
Without understanding his theme of suffering, we may not be able to understand Dostoevsky in the real sense. You see his characters, right from Raskolnikov to the person in the White Knights, or Ivan Karamazov, or Underground Man,
Idiot.
Golyadkin, Prince Mishkin in The Idiot, and others. All of them go through, in a sense, a lot of suffering. Probably the reason is that Dostoevsky believes that suffering is, in a sense, a way to tell you how much you have lived or how much you have loved. Essentially, to understand love, he sets this thing as a standard, that if you suffer for the sake of love, if you suffer for the sake of love, this shows you how much you love. If it is the love of God, if it is the love of a person. For example, Alyosha Karamazov in Brothers Karamazov suffers for the love of God, for the love of Christ. Sukuta suffer in this shows how much he loves Christ, actually. God, in a sense. And again, for example, Prince Mishkin, if he suffers, how much he loves whosoever he loves.
Humanity at large.
Humanity at large, yes.
Kind man.
Or let's say there is this the first son of Fyodor Pavlovich in Brothers Karamazov, Dmitry Karamazov. He suffers for the sake of his drunkenness and for the sake of his excesses, passions. Even that includes the love of a woman by the name Grushenka. So, in a sense, suffering is a recurrent theme in Dostoevskian writings. Tamsin characters chahawan ye cheez in a simple word ki yuta zyada suffer chu karan, yuta tormented life guzaran chu, tuta chasan is kya love of something. It is through suffering that he gives meaning to life. I would like to talk about existential philosophy, where it's said that this world is inherently a meaningless place. It does not have an innate meaning, an inherent meaning.
What Dostoevsky says.
No, I'm speaking about existential philosophy in a very general sense. This world is devoid of any inherent meaning. It does not have a meaning. But one may choose to give it a meaning. And it is this meaning, for example, if it's your family, if it's your beloved, if it is your God, for example, it is through these things that you give meaning to your life. And it is only through suffering that you realize these things. It seems to be a sort of a contradictory in our this understanding, love and suffering at the same time. But Dostoevsky writings are full of all this. That these contradictions within contradictions within a person.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Dostoevsky about suffering. He's preparing the reader